Hey guys, my name is Alicia, and if you didn't know, I make thrifting, and in this case, sewing DIY type content every single week. And today I have a sewing tutorial for you. When I saw Teddy Fresh release this top, I just instantly fell in love with it, especially in this like navy blue color. It is just so me. I love the plaid. I feel like it just makes it the perfect transitional piece from summer to fall. Not to mention the bows, which has been super on trend this year. This top even converts into a skirt, and I definitely have a soft spot for convertible clothing, so this was right up my alley. The only problem was that after shipping and the conversion from USD to Canadian, this top would have run me about $90, which is personally a little steep for a single top. So instead, I'm going to show you guys exactly how to make this for a lot cheaper and just a few simple sewing techniques. One of those techniques being shirring, which is going to be like the main body of the piece. It's what gives it that gathered stretchy part to the main chest area. So all you're going to need for this project is some fabric. You could totally thrift like a couple pillowcases or a bedsheet from the thrift store and you'd totally be good to go. I personally was going for accuracy with this project and ended up finding a really close match to the original navy gingham print. It's even made of the exact same seersucker blend, so that was perfect. You're also going to need some elastic thread, ideally in the same color as your fabric. And lastly, just a few hardware pieces for the straps. So you're going to need 4 G-hooks and 2 strap adjusters. So first things first, we have to make our pattern. Luckily, the website actually has the exact garment measurements. So I was not only able to design the pattern to be exactly the same as the original, but this project is super size inclusive and will accommodate sizes extra small all the way up to 3X. And I made it super easy for you guys by doing all the math. So all you're gonna have to do is figure out one little thing, which is gonna be the shirring percentage. So basically, depending on the type of fabric you're using, elastic thread, and even your sewing machine, the amount that the fabric shrinks when shirring is going to change. So before we even start, we are gonna go ahead and just do a little test. And at the same time, I'm gonna show you guys exactly how to achieve the shirring look. The very first thing you want to do is wind your elastic thread onto a bobbin. Unfortunately, you cannot do this on your machine like normal. You will have to do this by hand. The tricky thing is you don't want to pull on the elastic thread too tight, but you also don't want to wind it too loose. So just go ahead, gently pull on the thread and wrap it around that bobbin until it is full. Don't worry, this actually doesn't take as long as it seems. And once you're done, if you're able to let go of the thread and it kind of just stays in place, that should mean that the tension should be good. Then you can just go ahead and load your regular thread on top and your elastic thread on the bottom, just like normal, and you're good to go. It's super important to change your sewing machine settings. So for stitch type, we want to do straight stitch. For stitch length, we want to go pretty much as long as we can, so in this case 4. And for tension, you're gonna kind of have to play around with this, but for now, let's try 5. You basically just want it to be a high tension. Next, you want to take a small piece of the fabric that you're gonna use and just measure out the length of where you are going to be sewing and go ahead and write that down. Then we can take our scrap piece to the machine and just sew a straight stitch down the middle. As you sew, you can see how the fabric really just starts to scrunch up right away. Once it's done, we're gonna remeasure that same piece to see how much it shrunk. So just write that down as well. And once you have your 2 measurements, you're gonna divide your original length by your shirred length in order to give you your shirring percentage. This is basically going to determine how much stretch your piece is going to have, and the stretchier the better. So I would definitely be aiming for a shirring percentage of 2 or higher. Anything lower than 2, I would go back to your machine and play around with the tension, maybe try 6 or a 7. And anything over 2, it just means that your piece is going to be extra stretchy, which is a good thing for this project. The only thing is it will end up requiring more fabric, so just keep that in mind. So once you have your shirring percentage, all you have to do is go to my pre-made little Excel Google spreadsheet that you can find as a link in the description of this video. First thing you want to do is go to File, make a copy. This will save an editable version onto your own Google Drive. And then from there, just go ahead, find your size, filter it if you want. Just go ahead and type in your shirring percentage. I've highlighted it in yellow for you. And bam, you have your pattern measurements. I've labeled them as A, B, C, D, and E. I even included a column showing how many rows of shirring you're gonna have to sew, just to like mentally prepare you, and exactly how much elastic thread you're going to need. So let's get to pattern making. My go-to for creating patterns has always been like Christmas wrapping paper, just because I always have it around the house, and they usually come with this like pre-made grid, which is perfect for this. We're gonna start by measuring out measurement A, which is actually gonna be the top chest area of our pattern. Then we're gonna draw out measurement C and D, making sure to leave a little mark of where the two meet. Then where we left that mark, we can go ahead and draw in measurement B. This is like the waist area. And then lastly, we can add measurement A once again on the very bottom. So once you have all your lines drawn out, you can just go ahead and connect them to make this kind of like hourglass type shape. And our pattern is complete. Keep in mind, this is gonna give us about 1 inch of seam allowance all around. Now that we have our pattern created, it is time to cut out our fabric. We're gonna go ahead and cut out 2 of our pattern pieces. One is gonna be the front of the shirt, one is gonna be the back. Then we just need the strap and bow attachments. Ideally, you do wanna cut all of these pieces out on the bias. What does that mean? It basically just means cutting it on a diagonal. This is just gonna give it a little bit of extra stretch that's kind of nice for straps. And it's just gonna make them sit a little bit better, not like fall off your shoulders. Don't worry if you don't have enough fabric to do this, you can totally just do them like normal straight and it'll be fine. And we're gonna do 4 long strips, so 2 for the straps and 2 for the bows. The bows are always gonna end up being 20 inches no matter what size your garment is, but for the strap length, you can just refer to my spreadsheet. Just keep in mind, this was the only thing I couldn't pull from the website of the original garment, so they are kind of estimates. Feel free to just double check just in case. You can literally just measure out like your bra strap where it connects the front and bottom, and then just add a couple inches for seam allowance and it should be long enough. Since these straps are adjustable, it is better to go a little bit longer than you think rather than shorter, because you can always shorten them with the little adjuster. And then once all our straps are cut out, we can create 4 smaller ones. These are just going to be the little loops that are actually on the inside of the shirt that our straps are gonna hook onto. I personally like to prep all of my pieces before I start sewing, so I just went ahead and drew out my seam allowance lines on both of my bodice pieces. The first line being 1/2 inch from the edge and the second line being 1 inch from the edge. This is basically going to act as a guide for when we're sewing later. It's just going to make things a lot easier. And then on the other side of the garment, I just did the same thing for our hem lines. Speaking of hemming, that's actually going to be the very first sewing step of this project. So we're going to go ahead and use those little markers I drew earlier as a guide and just go ahead and fold the fabric twice, pinning it in place. Once you've pinned both the top and bottom of the garment, you can just go ahead and iron it all down so it just sits nicely and flat. And then all you have to do is just take it to your machine and sew it in place with just regular non-elastic thread. Just don't forget to change your sewing machine settings back to normal, since we did do that test earlier. And then just repeat that for the second bodice piece. Once that's done, we can start prepping our straps. So we're just gonna go and iron down all of the straps, folding 3 times. First on the right side so it just meets in the middle, and then you can do the same on the left side. And then finally just fold that whole thing in half. We're basically creating bias tape here that is going to be our straps and our bows. And make sure to just repeat that on all of the strips until you have something that's looking like this. For the bows, just make sure to fold the ends inwards so we have a nice clean finish, since these are going to be the only ends that will be exposed. And then you can just go ahead, take all of these to the machine and sew them in place. Next, it's time to assemble our adjustable straps. Starting with the adjuster piece, slide the strap up and then down the other side. Once that's in, you can take the G-hook and add it onto the end. Give yourself a little more slack at the adjuster, and you're gonna slide the end of the strap back where it came from and down the other side. Then you can just attach it back to itself and sew it in place, and you will have a nice little adjustable strap. As for the other end, all you have to do is loop on one more G-hook and once again sew that in place. And our straps are all ready to go. Now that all the nitty-gritty is out of the way, we can finally get to the bulk of this project, which is the shirring. So I'm just gonna go in and put a little mark at every 1/2 inch, which is basically just gonna be my guide for where I want to start each row of shirring. If you want to save time, and elastic. You can do this at every inch instead of half inch, but it's gonna look a little bit different and not as high quality in my opinion. It'll still work though. And luckily I am working with a gingham print, so I already have lines preset into the fabric that I can follow. But if you are working with a different print, you definitely want to like fully draw these out as a guide. And we are ready to start shirring. So make sure your machine settings are set correctly. Switch out your bobbin for the elastic bobbin thread, and you're all good to just start sewing like normal. Just making sure to reverse stitch at the beginning and end, just like you would normally do. And you're gonna wanna aim to have your stitches start and end basically in between those two seam allowance lines that we drew. This is important because we are gonna sew over them later and we want them to be basically sandwiched in between. Once you do get to the end of the row, you can simply just place your needle down, turn your garment to the side, lift the needle, and then shimmy your fabric down. Then you can just go ahead, place your needle back in, rotate once again, and you're good to start doing your next line. You'll notice that as you sew more and more rows, the fabric bunches up a lot tighter, so you are gonna want to stretch that fabric back out as you sew, and then just repeat until you have lined the full top half of the garment. Just make sure too you are sewing on the top half. The top half is slightly larger than the bottom half, so keep that in mind. If you do inevitably run out of elastic thread like halfway through a row, you can just simply tie the top and bottom thread together a couple times in a knot, and that should be enough to just hold it in place. And then you can just start right back up where you left off. So once all your rows are complete, you should have something that looks like this. And at this point you may be like, Alicia, that is a literal baby-sized top. Like, how is this ever gonna fit me? Just trust the process and remember that this is gonna be able to stretch out to the initial size of our pattern. So as long as the pattern you created is bigger than your body measurements, like, don't worry, you're gonna be fine. So repeat that on the second bodice until both of our two pieces are nice and shirred. And we can finally attach these so that they start looking like an actual shirt. And we're actually gonna do this by using the French seam method. So you're gonna wanna place them on top of each other, wrong sides together, which is the opposite of what we normally would do. Just remember that the wrong side is the side that you can actually see that elastic thread on, and then just pin them in place at the sides, right along the outermost seam allowance line that we drew, the one closest to the edge. This is super important that we sew right along this line for the next step we're going to do. And then you can just go ahead and sew both of those in place on either side. Next, we're gonna take our scissors and trim down that seam allowance. This part is super nerve-wracking because one wrong cut and it is game over. We've made it this far. We do not want to accidentally cut anything we're not supposed to, so just be very, very careful with the scissors. Go slow, double check how many layers of fabric you're cutting through because we do not want to restart at this point. But you basically want to trim that extra fabric about like a 1/4 inch to the stitch we just made. And once that's done, you can actually flip the garment inside out and start pinning the edges once again. This time we're basically encasing that raw edge on the inside of the stitch. And then you can just sew along those sides once again. And this time when you flip it right side out, you'll have these perfectly clean seams with a nice finish on the inside, and that is the French seam. So at this point, the actual structure of the top is basically complete. We just need to add all the details. So go ahead, try it on, make sure it fits, because at this point you're probably a little worried. And then just go ahead and mark with safety pins where you want those straps to sit. You can also just use your bra straps as a guide. And now we are ready to add the loops and the bows. So to create the loop, basically just fold the two ends inwards and then fold the whole thing in half. And then you can just go ahead and pin that onto the inside of the shirt, making sure it's not sticking out. You can also add the bows at this point as well, pinning them in the exact same spot, but this time on the outside of the shirt. Then you can just go ahead and sew it all down, and this will secure both the loop and the bow at the same time. Just remember that the bows are only needed on the front of the top, but you can go ahead and repeat that process for all 4 loops. And at this point, the sewing is complete, and all that's left to do is assemble this top by just, neatly tying our little bows. And then you can just go ahead and hook your straps on, and we are good to go. I am so happy with how this project turned out, and I'm honestly so impressed, like, just how similar it looks to the original. I'm super happy I took that extra time to find the right fabric, because now I just know I'm gonna get so much more wear out of it. And this project was honestly really simple to make. Not gonna lie, there was a lot of tedious parts, like making those straps and doing all the shirring, but from like a technical standpoint, not much to it. And it's also very flexible. Like, if you just wanted to make this into a tube top, you could totally skip out on the whole strap making process to begin with. And I will say one of the main reasons that I did make this top was, like I said, because I loved the idea of wearing it as a skirt as well. And unfortunately, I just feel like it doesn't really work great as a skirt. I think if I were to do this again, I would either size up to, you know, accommodate for the extra width on my bottom half, or I would try to get my shirring percentage a little bit higher, like maybe a 2.25 or even a 2.5, just so that it's extra stretchy to accommodate for my hips as well. So definitely keep that in mind if you are planning on making this and you do want to wear it as a skirt. And if you are planning on making this, please let me know, and like I'd love to see or hear how it turns out. And as for how much it cost for me to make this, the fabric cost me about $15 per yard, which was plenty. I only ended up using one roll of elastic, like not even the whole thing. That was only $2.70, and the hardware was 35 cents a piece. So that comes out to a grand total of $22.36, meaning that I saved about $70. Obviously, that does not include my labor, but I think it was totally worth it. I like this project so much that I actually even made one for my best friend Emily in a completely different print, so I just think this top is like super versatile for like any type of print or fabric. So yeah, that is my whole tutorial. If you found it very easy to follow along, I do have quite a few sewing tutorials that kind of have a similar setup, so check those out if you want. I'll link a playlist. And yeah, as per usual, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week.